Man, today is one that I've been super excited for ever since this guy reached out to us when we started exploring this whole new avenue of drumming that you and I are very naive to, but anxious to learn, or excited. Anxious is not the right word there. Excited to learn a whole lot more about. But yeah, I'm stoked.
Yeah, just something that's new and fresh to us. So, and hopefully we're able to gather a little bit more audience for both realms of this activity that kind of merge together in beautiful harmony. But yeah, I'm ready to get into it.
All right, well, let's intro this real quick, and then I'll let you intro the guest. But welcome, everyone, to the Aged Out Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Fantini, and with me, as always, is...
Evan Worrell.
And we'll keep this short and sweet today. Comment, like, subscribe, share the video. Podcast services, we're all over that. We're all over YouTube as well. Facebook, Instagram, follow us there. Never miss an update. agedoutpodcast.com if you want to grab any merch, shirts, stickers, all that good stuff. Patreon.com or the join button here on YouTube if you want to support us financially that way. And Aged Out Fundamentals. No matter what area or level of drumming you're at, those play-along tracks, those practice tools, it's free. Everyone should use them. I still use them on a regular basis myself to keep my hands moving. Trying to fight the old man hands real bad over here, but I think Father Time is undefeated. So with that, take it away, Evan, and let's get going.
Yeah, so to introduce our guest, we kind of were hit with a flood of messages and comments on our recent videos when we were reacting to Cold Steel and Norfolk's $1 Million Funk Squad. And this guy, Shawn Hall, reached out to us. It's like, hey, man, I'd love to come tell you guys a little bit about it. So that video is kind of catalyst to all this. And he was gracious enough to carve out some time. And we're excited to know, just have our horizons broadened into this different style of drumming that is extremely engaging and also just different from what we know. So welcome, Shawn.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Been watching you guys' stuff, like I was telling you, for a while. So happy to answer any questions and explore anything we wanna talk about today.
For sure.
Yeah, man. So real quick before we get into kind of the culture of drumming and what we were reacting to with those two ensembles, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of like where you're from, your exposure to drums and percussion.
Yeah, so I'm from the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. Grew up in Hampton, Newport News, the York County area. Graduated from Bethel High School a million years ago in the before times, as I like to tell my young people. Went to Norfolk State for undergrad, and then I went here, there, and everywhere. Joined the military at one point. When I finally got out, I went back to Norfolk State and started instructing over there. And I spent the last 6 years I've been over there. Teaching, instructing as a percussion area coordinator. I left probably, about 2 months ago, maybe less than that. And I've just come on with Hampton University's marching band. Mm-hmm. So I am instructing at Hampton University as we speak. So basically grew up like
Nice.
A lot of kids do here, playing, band in middle school, playing drums or whatever, and kind of took off from there. A lot of guys, start with the marching stuff first. I actually started on the concert side. We were geeked about percussion ensemble and concert band back in the day. The marching band, drumline stuff came later, so that was super exciting once I got into all that.
Yeah, I feel like that's, similar to my road and probably Mike's too, but yep. I do feel like within the culture and style of, the HBCU style of drumming, it does start with the marching and rudimental stuff earlier than I really expected. I've seen stuff on Facebook pop up all the time, posts of really young kids, like 3, 4, 5. They already got like modified instruments that are smaller to fit them. They're learning how to play traditional grip. They're learning how to play rudiments, double stroke rolls and stuff. I feel like they get exposed to that earlier than maybe the typical percussionist in junior high. Does that feel accurate?
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people do, especially depending on the community, right? So there's community drum lines, community marching bands where young people will learn very early, what it's like to make music outside of like a school scenario. Like I learned through school. Some kids learn through church. Other kids learn like being in these organizations. I taught at a high school when I first got out of college. And the section leader at that time, he was a 12th grader. He said he had been marching for that high school for like 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
Because as a middle schooler, he kind of bumped up, the way a kid would in sports. I'm going to play, an age group up or whatever. And, As long as the local municipality doesn't have an issue with it, a lot of these kids get exposed to the community groups or to even to the high school stuff really early.
That's awesome. Yeah, we talk a lot about how, like, in our world, like drum corps and like DCI and WGI, California has kind of become a mecca for like our side of the house. And the secret sauce we've determined is just they start them younger than everybody else. They're getting good instruction starting at 10 years old, 11, 12, whereas a lot of other places in the country, it's like, don't really start holding traditional grip till you're 14, 15 years old. And, that's really it. The younger you start, the better.
That was me. When I was a freshman, I played snare drum in the marching band, and they had this weird thing where I had to put the stick sideways in my left hand and hold it through these two fingers. And they were like, "Nah, this is how you got to play now." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm coming off drum set. I'm coming off concert snare, like marimba. Like that's not comfortable." So I broke the rules and just played matched for basically the entire season because she wants to play that weird way that makes your hand hurt. Like man, it's different when you come from a concert background. You know what I mean?
Well, I forget sometimes how awkward traditional grip is when you first start. And to remind myself, like, sometimes I'll like mirror kids that I'm giving lessons to, and I'll put my right hand in traditional, and I'm like, how did I figure this out 15 years ago, 20 years, whatever it was? Like, it is so awkward.
It's awkward, and it doesn't make sense, especially if your drum isn't tilted.
Right.
Yeah. The ergonomics don't make sense.
Yeah, even like not as much today, but like back in the day, like I would prop my practice pad up on like a little pillow so it leaned like this when I'm just at home like drumming, because like who wants to tilt my wrist all the way back like that if I don't have to? It's so much tension.
It does feel like too, with like your alls and the gear you use, it's still more old school than like the quads and the tenors have like the more modern carriers. It's just it makes sense to support those drums and what the harnesses are. But like the snares and stuff will still wear the slings and like I guess it's like a thigh leg support. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a leg rest. The most popular one is a model Pearl makes. I think it's like the LR40 or something like that. But a lot of drum companies will build on their own leg rest, understanding that HBCU style drums or high stepping drum lines are gonna try to buy them. My experience is that there's been a different renditions of the leg rest. Premier had a popular leg rest at one point in time, but that leg rest isn't around anymore. So Pearl's the one that most people go to. But yeah, you're right. It's pretty traditional. Some HBCU drum lines don't march quads at all. So it's just like kind of the three voices plus cymbals. It'll be the snare drum will be the high drum, the tenor drum, the single tenor will be the middle voice, and then bass drums will be the low with the cymbals on top.
Yeah, a bunch of people commented several different things because we were inquiring, like they were like more of those tonal side bass drums. They're almost like toms and stuff too. And I'm sure there's several different names just depending on where you're at and where you're located. But that was one thing that stuck out to me was each group of the drumline definitely felt like it had a specific identity. I mean, you could say that for drum corps too, but I just kept falling back to like how I referenced drum set, and it actually made a ton of sense when I was just scrolling through the Instagram names. Like even at Norfolk State, the different ensembles or different sections have like the symbols like, oh, we're the $1 million timekeepers. I was like, that makes like a ton of sense to me when I first learned how to play drum set, because like everything was based around the cymbals. It's like, well, this is what you play the most. So like your hi-hat, your ride better be in time or else your groove is fleeced. And then like, the bass drums just felt like kind of like the soul or heart of it. Like, that same thing you would in like when you're playing drum set. And then, you got your backbeat and then your toms, your tenors. It's kind of like the flash at times where you like doing the fills and stuff.
And everything,
like, I don't know. Is that something that sounds relevant to like how you all would describe it, or I don't know, walk me through that?
Yes, definitely. I'd say like if you ask anybody with hours, that's what we would call it. Like if you've marched in an HBCU drumline, if you have hours, like you would say that each section has a distinct voice within the group. And you might get 30,000 breakdowns about like the language they used to describe that. But 100%, and people have, as I'm sure, like in the drum corps world, there are very very strong opinions about like what each voice is supposed to be for the section. or even for the ensemble.
Yep.
You know, I mean, if you watch enough drum corps, you can see, okay, yeah, so like every time the trumpets play, that guy writes a snare solo. You know what I mean? Or every time so there's strong ideas about how things operate. But generally speaking, you got the distinction among the voices, which I think is universal among like all groups. It doesn't matter if you're WGI, DCI, or HBCU. Like if you need to be able to sample different voices. So if I can hear the difference between the snares, the quads, and then what we will call it. So if I ever say tenor drum in this conversation, I'm talking about the single tenor, either mounted on the leg or on the chest. So upright tenor drum would be the chest tenor, and then the leg tenor or single tenor would be the version that you strike, aimed at the ground, looks like a snare drum.
Okay.
So different voices for different registers.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
To stay on, not necessarily the topic of the sound, I guess, I want to talk about how big the drum lines are compared to, and this might, like, I think when we've watched Cold Steel and we've watched Norfolk so far, and I mean, we're talking like 10 bass drums, 14, 12 snare drums. Like usually if there's both of them have quads, and there's like 4 or 5, which is on par usually with what you'll see in drum corps and indoor. But is that just one of those things where it's like, hey, we got the people that can play, let's just go 14 this year, 13, or is it what? I guess, is there a method to the madness, I guess, or the reason behind why they're as big as they are?
Well, what I'll say is Norfolk. The two groups you called out were Norfolk State and North Carolina A&T. Both of those drum lines are very successful and very popular. So a lot of kids will audition for those groups in particular. And so for those groups, they're they can take however many people they want to take.
Yeah.
So why do they take as many is a different answer. The answer to that question would be the size of the band programs are huge in a lot of these bands compared to like your typical, what's world class? Well, it's like 165 members, like whatever that.
Something like that, yeah.
But a ton of that's going to be like auxiliary, right? It's going to be guard. So it's like the number you might, if you are in a successful like a large HBCU band program, I mean there might be 50, 55 trumpets.
Holy shit.
So it's like I might be exaggerating there, but I mean it's not uncommon to have 20 plus euphoniums, 20 plus trombones, 20 plus mellophones, 30, 40 plus trumpets. That's not uncommon. So, and then you got these young people putting their entire heart and soul through the instrument, you know what I mean? So it's like, and the drums, just like everywhere, drums are usually somewhere in the back lingering, right? So you got to be heard. So that's the reason why the sizes are the way they are.
Okay, so it's band size, and then a little bit of like, if we got the players, why not?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, like at Norfolk State, like they get drowned out a lot by the brass. I mean, if they're on the back hash and you got the entire brass section in front of them playing, fortissimo, I mean, you have 9 bass drums. You're playing all kind of intricate rolls and split. You ain't gonna hear it.
Right. Well, also too, last thing I'll say about this, and then we can move on, is that just to give kudos to the groups we have watched, like in our world, you'll see 7 snare drums, 8, 9, maybe if you're feeling brave, you'll go 10 if you think you have the talent to do it. Some of the stuff that like Norfolk and Cold Steel would play with like 12 and 14 snare drums, I'm like, man, that sounds really good for how many. So just, I guess, take my hat off to those groups. I guess it's impressive to sound that good with that number of drums and snare guts and everything.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. Snare guts. That's a pet peeve of mine. It's a lot of a lot of drums, a lot of resonance, a lot of you know what I mean, like. And so, but I mean, I'd say a lot of these, especially the more serious groups, they treat band and drums in particular almost like, a D1 sport. Right. So it's like you're preparing in the summer. You'll probably have tryouts before the tryouts. You're going to be there before band camp starts. You're going to be drumming between classes. I mean, it's a pretty serious activity, though. We don't have the Indianapolis, finals run. We don't have, semis and prelims and all that, but, for bragging rights and, for legacy, it's really important to be the best you can be.
Yeah.
Well, I think the legacy speaks volumes. And, clean is when you achieve clarity. I mean, that's immortalized, thankfully now on YouTube.
Oh yeah,
and like it's undeniable. I want to backtrack a little bit. You know, we were kind of talking before we started recording, and this will lock in on style. And we've kind of joked on this before in previous episodes of podcasts, just about mine and Mike's beginnings of drumming back to our inception. And even Mike said, like, you know, he first saw like the movie Drumline, and that's what got him into drums. But like at the time when the movie came out, like everybody's like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And I'm like, I mean, it's not really like what I do, but like I like this movie and it's entertaining. It just felt like so far removed from like what I was doing stylistically with like middle school concert band but I'm curious, like it's a Hollywood movie. Does that even have anywhere near like an inkling of representation for like the HBCU style? Does it pay homage a little bit, but miss the mark on some aspects? What's your take?
Yeah, so the Drumline, the movie. Okay, so that's 2002-ish. So just for a point of reference, I was like 10th, 11th grade when this movie came out, right? And I was in my high school drumline, and man, that like, you know, reignited my love for the game, man. Like, you know, and it was Hollywood, but I was young back then, so I didn't understand. This was before YouTube, so if it wasn't going on like in my local area, I didn't know anything about it. So that was my first time seeing Morris Brown, you know, which I found out later. Oh, that's
Was
real
actually
college.
them.
yeah.
Who and they're playing actual cadences and their actual material.
You go back and watch it now, you're like, wait, what?
Well, yeah, because now I've seen the real clips so many times of some of the stuff that they played in the movie. Same thing with what was it Atlanta A&T, the Good Guys, like that's a high school drumline. I actually just taught a student from that high school drumline in Atlanta.
Wow.
So like, those kids are, you know, they're high school age kids, young people, just, you know, drumming. They still wear that uniform. Like that is their high school uniform. They just, I guess, sewed an Atlanta A&T over it. But if you go on YouTube, you can find Southwest DeKalb's high school band, high school drumline, and they're really serious about drumming.
I did not know that.
But I always say that group or that movie was the best thing that ever happened to HBCU drumlines and the worst thing that ever happened to HBCU drumlines. It was the worst thing because anytime I ever told anyone I marched in an HBCU drumline, they always say, "Oh, you mean like the movie? It's like that?" And it's like, no, man. But it also gave us a lot of exposure in this world.
I was going to say, you know, any exposure to like, you know, this thing that we all love, which is drumming, is all press is good press. If you know, as long as it's not just straight up bad. But you know, stylistically too, Mike and I are obviously locked into like the drum corps world, but every group kind of has their own style and the way that they choose to quote unquote like skin the cat. Like Paul Rennick is not the same as what Scott Johnson does, as Tom Rarick does, as Tom Monks does. Is that kind of similar throughout HBCU style, like college down to middle school, depending on geographically where you are in the country?
Yes. And in fact, if you go to none of these drummers, well, very few of these drummers are showing up to a HBCU band or drumline without any clue as to what that group does. Chances are they're probably influenced by that group or has been playing that group's music or material for years while they were in high school. And many of them, it's been a dream of theirs. I can't tell you how many people have auditioned. Oh, you know, it's my dream to be here. I've wanted this ever since I was in 6th grade, ever since I saw you on this or that. So a lot of times the kids that come to these programs have they've already experienced the group and they know what they're getting themselves into. So they're in the same way, like if you go to like a Crusaders camp, you would have worked on I'll call it Crusaders mechanics, right? You're not going to show up there and try to play like a Blue Devil, right? So it's the same thing. If you go to Bethune-Cookman, you're not going to play at Bethune-Cookman the way you would play at Jackson State. You would have already made an effort to try to emulate that group before you show up.
Yeah,
Makes
learn
sense.
the packets, learn their exercise routines, learn some sort of like cadence that they've done. Like, hey, I'm going to reference myself with whoever's writing the music or the arrangements. Like, I want to know like kind of what their tendencies are. It makes it faster to pick up stuff. That is like a curious thing too about like the audition process. Do you guys have just like, you talked about a little bit, like, you know, if the drumline takes it real seriously, which anybody who's serious about their craft, like, I have mad respect for. That's kind of the guys of this channel. Like, we critique things, but it's all under the respect of like, yo, dude, whoever's doing this stuff, whether it's drum corps, these HBCUs style drumming, it's like mad respect to the hours devoted to the craft. But do you guys have like anything that would maybe differ from the audition style that, like, you know, maybe we're used to with drum corps? Like, you go, you audition, you get cut or you get a spot. Is there like rotations that come around, like, hey, you didn't make it right now, but maybe in 3 weeks we'll see what happens?
Yeah, so it's not so much like the camp style callbacks, just because like most people are either in high school or can't afford to get there, or it's just not really that doesn't happen very often. And every school has a different process, right? And that's usually set by the band director, and then the band director might leverage his percussion instructor to say, all right, kind of let me know how many kids you want, or here's the scholarship budget, or whatever the case may be, and then it's kind of up to the instructor to make their own decisions. So I can't speak like a lot about like what every school is like. I know a couple of schools. I know it's going to be, especially when the marching band is tied to the music program. A lot of times it's more academic, right? So it's like, I'm going to need to hear these rudiments, open, close, open, right? Sometimes there might be mallets involved. Like, I showed up to my audition with a concert snare piece, a marching snare piece, a mallet piece, and a timpani piece. I didn't play all of it, but that was kind of the expectation. Like, you need to be prepared, because if you want the scholarship money, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can do all these things. That being said, I'd say most schools are probably looking more on the rudimental side. They want to know how well you play on the drums, because marching bands are usually like kind of the face of the HBCUs. So that's your moneymaker.
I would say that applies for almost any program that's affiliated with any school. Your marching band is your kind of the face of your organization. They're the ones doing the parades, they're doing the homecomings, they're doing the football games, the local Christmas parade, anything like that. So you kind of have to have that in you, I would say, to be able to get dollars, whether it's like grant money or donation money, stuff for scholarships. I mean, local businesses, whatever the case may be. So I definitely can relate and agree with that.
So
that does
sticking on the audition process for a second. Obviously, like you mentioned, like the callback camps, and like in the drum corps world and indoor world really too. The audition itself, is it a lot more individual based, or is there like you do an individual, but then there's also like all the snares are going to be in one room and we're going to be able to evaluate you playing with other people, or is it more, I guess I don't use the word isolated, but I hope that question makes sense.
It's definitely more individually based, because there's a dollar amount tied to your ability. I heard a band director one time say that band scholarships are basically for virtuosos. Like, if you can come in and make a mark on the program on day one, that's really who that money is meant for.
Okay.
That being said, different groups have different scholarship budgets. So it's like, it might be a couple people in your section, like 2 or 3 who get scholarships, or it might be the entire band, right? I'm at Hampton University now, instructing over there, and I can tell you that if I remember correctly, every student, and if not every student, then most of the kids in the band are on scholarship.
Nice.
And it's I could go more into that, but it's dependent on the institution, right? Every school is different. As for me, like the way I like to do it is I've merged a little bit of the individual audition stuff in with the group stuff. Over time, I've realized that like any kid, I say any, I mean a lot of kids, can work 6 months on a solo, show up and then play, and then it's like, oh man, that kid's amazing. And then you ask him to play something really simple and he can't do it because, he's been working for 6 months on that one solo. So I try to throw new things at people. I'll throw rudiments I'm sure that they've probably never seen before, or will require them to think about it, put little passages and stuff together to kind of better evaluate, not just like if they can play it, because most of them won't be able to play whatever complicated literature I give them, but also like how do they negotiate this thing that they've never dealt with before. You know what I mean? Like,
how do they handle a curveball?
Exactly. How do you handle it? And then like are you close? Are you anywhere in the ballpark? Have the skill that support whatever is in that passage of music? Has that been developed at all, or is this completely, is this completely over there, left field?
Yeah, because I was hearing it's more individual based. Sorry, Evan, I'll let you go in a second. I'm just on a roll. Like, has there ever been situations where if it is more individual based, because we know how important it is, like from drum corps, from our experience, to be able to play well with others, and so that's why it's interesting to hear. It's a lot of emphasis on the individual. I don't want to get too technical, but like, have there been situations where not only has a kid, I don't want to say auditioned well and really didn't have a lot under the surface from what they auditioned on, but where they were great in the individual, and then you get them in a group setting and like their ears aren't really dialed in very well, and like they just don't have a lot of experience in the line, basically? Is that something you encounter at all, or?
100%. I had a kid, a student a couple years ago. He might have been my top snare prospect that year. And he came in and he struggled all through camp, like struggled bad. And we were all kind of looking, even the vets on the line were like, dude, what's going on with you? We've been watching you in high school for the last couple of years. Like, this isn't really you. And, we keep a healthy distance between the students and the staff. But I remember seeing him like, in transition somewhere. Maybe I was walking up to another office and I passed him on the way and I said, what's going on, man? You all right? And then I said, I noticed you've been struggling a little bit. And he just started gushing out like, I don't know what's going on, Mr. Hall. I don't know what's happening. So even he was aware of like how he was this incredible section leader in high school, and they showed up on this, this drumline with dozens and dozens of people. Yeah. He just couldn't figure it out. He couldn't get his heights right. He couldn't get clean. His left hand was higher than his right hand. He's not even left-handed. Why is all these things happening to him? So yeah, that to answer your question, that does happen.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but those things are good. Like those like grids and type stuff. Like, all right, let's just see how adaptable and coachable you are. Like, here we go. To kind of get back to, and obviously like what Mike and I have is an incredibly small sample size of like what we've been recently watching. But through both of those videos, Cold Steel, Norfolk State, like they play for such extended long periods of time. And, kind of what we were asking questions about on that is like, what's the, like, is this thing that you're doing a specific routine that's developed for the football games? Is it for something outside the football games that's more of like a competitive style where they meet up with other drum lines? Because like it just goes and this thing morphs from one style to one flow to the next flow. So like what's that all about?
It all started, well, I would say football is the catalyst for the band battles, right? So in the same way, like, football events are super competitive in Black colleges, the band competition that happens during the game might be even more competitive than the football game is. So, and then we have rivals like conference rivals or, regional rivals or whatever. So it's funny that you mentioned North Carolina A&T because that's actually one of Norfolk State's rivals. So these schools have kind of been in the same conference or definitely in the same region, but at one point in time they were in the same conference,
They're
so
only like 3.5 hours apart, right?
Is it about that? Maybe 4? They're in Greensboro.
Damn.
So it's one of those trips where you get on the bus, you go to sleep, when you wake up you're there.
All right.
It's not too bad. Maybe no, it might be 5 hours or so. I mean, it's close enough to where we can get up and back pretty quick. We'll do one night. If you're in the Virginia area, Virginia schools will do one night down there and come back the next day. That being said, because the competitions were getting so intense, the drum lines would come down usually after the game, and they would battle somewhere like in the end zone or on the 50-yard line, even on the track, and they would exchange back and forth. And we put together these blocks that would sometimes be 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes long of material designed to, best the other drum line. Eventually, the directors got the idea, hey, man, we should put this in a gym and charge people $15-$20 for it, and this could be a fundraising activity.
Yeah, for sure.
So in late 90s, early 2000s, they started doing that, and the band battle culture got really big. At one point in time when I was marching, we did 3 gym battles a season. And there was a period of time where we never saw each other face to face. We only would see our rival schools for a floor show. And then that's where the floor show culture kind of started with all the movement and everything. So,
Is
so
that
to
what
answer
we
your
watched
question,
in our reaction video? Was that floor show, or was that just like an exhibition thing? Like, what was that?
yes and no. Okay, here's the best way to explain it. You know how DCI has borrowed a lot from WGI, and there's a lot of elements that exist now in DCI that originally came from WGI.
Yep.
So like when HBCU Drumlines, particularly on the East Coast, when they do a gym show or an exhibition show with no battle or anything like that, which is what you guys watched, they take from the indoor themes of movement, motion, making the show musically cohesive, trying to hit on different points with different meters, different tempo, all that kind of stuff. So that wasn't a competition, but it was at a high school drumline competition. They were performing as exhibition.
Okay.
This is like a recruiting tool.
Yeah, and the band directors and the people running the events, they love for the college drumlines to come out because it gets to get really excited.
So is that kind of the whole scope of, you mentioned like you guys don't have like Drum Corps has Lucas Oil or at the end of the season, or WGI has UD Arena in Dayton in April at the end of their season. Are most of the performances just kind of for, I guess, is there a competitive scene beyond just like for clout or for just like respect, like drumline battle scene? Like, are there formal competitions you go to where a bunch of drumlines go to it and it's judged, and what's what performance?
Is there a rubric?
Yeah, what performance opportunities are there? I guess where like you'll do stuff beyond just the college football game.
Believe it or not, you've actually stumbled into a really hot topic right now in the Black college world. Yeah, so there are onesie-twosie events that that are adjudicated with rubrics, but in the history of this thing, no, it hasn't really been that way. And part of the reason is these different bands and different drum lines, they're born out of tradition. Their allegiance and loyalties lie to, their band program, to the alumni of the university. I mean, most of these schools would rather a 10th or 12th place finish, but have their alumni be happy and proud of the work that they've done. Because when you come in, you're trying to, uphold whatever legacy was there when you got there. So much so that a lot of them don't like changing much at all. And to be frank, there's a lot of beauty in that. And then there's other groups who are like, no, we don't have any problems changing. We'll change with the times. Multi-tenors rolled around and tonal bass drums rolled around. Guess what? We're picking those up. We're going to figure that out too, So some schools, to answer your question, are more traditional. Some schools are more contemporary. But as of, was it last year, was the first year that ESPN actually held this thing called Band of the Year, where they have a power ranking thing that happens like every other week or something like that. And then they take an average of the top two D1 HBCU bands and the top two D2 HBCU bands. And then they compete in Atlanta in Mercedes-Benz Arena, Dome, whatever it's called. The new Georgia Dome, whatever that is.
Yeah, Mercedes.
And they compete in there the night before the Celebration Bowl, which is the Black College championship game.
That's awesome.
And
he's like, well, it is, but
so I mean that.
Go ahead.
That sounds like like what I saw in that movie that we all watched back in 2002. It's like, we're gonna have PD Pablo come out here and like see what's gonna happen.
No PD Pablo sightings as of yet, but ESPN has they're not part of the culture, so they've tapped into some people that they trust on the corporate side to make this thing happen. And so I'll just say all the kinks haven't yet been ironed out.
Yeah. They'll refine it over time.
We'd love to see what the criteria is.
Yeah. I mean,
to get in, rather, you mean?
What are you judging us on?
Yeah, fair. That was my next question. Like, even with the drumline battles, if there's no judging, like with the on the fly drumline battles, like, is it just largest crowd reaction wins? Like, how do you determine? Is it just one of those things where the crowd kind of decides, or?
Yeah, and then for this ESPN thing, it's a band. Just to be clear, it's a band competition, right? So it's like there are some groups that are still doing step 2 downfield drills, like patterns of motion, like what would you call it? symmetrical drills, and that's not going to change. They're not going to change that.
Yeah, like Texas, even like what Texas A&M does versus like, the Aggie band is very like militaristic and like we're gonna do this same routine, even OSU to a degree. But then you have other groups like Auburn this year is like, oh, we went out here and turned the lights out and performed with the band all had lights on the uniforms and instruments, and we turned the stadium lights out. So it's like just completely different.
Yeah, but the drum lines, they I guess they play a factor in the total score for the bands. Obviously, like if you have some type of drum solo or a feature, it's probably going to score a little higher. But outside of that, I think people don't really know what's what yet. So we'll give them some time. Maybe they'll work it out.
Hopefully, but like you said, I mean, if it's somebody that's like not really tapped in, it's like what kind of coverage? Not really doing this justice. Even when like Drum Corps was on PBS and ESPN, it's like, all right. Back to like those videos and stuff, and you're talking about like what we watched was like an exhibition that was kind of modified, but throughout all that stuff, there was so much like nonverbal communication, whether it's like, just like a different tap off or a different like hand signal or like a stick signal or something like that. I think that was one of the cooler things about the whole flow that just kept it engaging. Like when I'm watching WGI, DCI stuff, like they do their exercise, they stop, they cut, they turn the med on, they stop, they cut. But it was just like, both those videos were like a stream of conscience, just we're going to navigate in and out. Do you guys just designate like, hey, we're going to play this, and then whenever the section leader decides like it's time to move on, they'll give this signal or they'll play this lick and we're on to the next thing?
Yeah, so different cadences will be designed for different things. Some cadences are loopable, repeatable, right? Those are more like some of the marching cadences you're going to run, like they're going to be on a loop, kind of, like a street beat, right? You'll just loop it. And typically when it's time to switch it, it'll be like the drum captain or somebody will hold up a sign, to indicate to the rest of the section, like, hey, we're switching to this cadence whenever the turn of the phrase comes or something like that. So it just depends. To answer your question, there's a different drum language that happens. It could be nonverbal, like complete hand signs, or it could be like through a tap off. Like each piece of music might have its own individual tap off, and when you hear it, you instantly know what it is. So the section leader can tap it off like in his subdivision. You may have seen something like that too. It's just a quicker way to communicate, especially like if you're in the heat of a battle. Like I don't have time to be like, all right, hey, bass drums, did you hear it? Did you hear what I said? We're gonna start here at letter B, and I mean, you don't have time to do that. So a quick tap off or a hand sign is the easier way, especially if the drums are already going. If the drum line is struck up, I mean, it's going to be hard to hear anyway. So a hand sign works better.
I think that is, the mental maturity and mental stability that goes along with that, to just be like, all right, you heard it. Like, because how many times in younger percussionists or drummers, like middle school, junior high, high school, like, they're just not paying attention. So like everybody's got to be locked into what's going on at all time. Like you have to be aware of your peripheral, like, hey, don't miss it, or you're going to be the dude that like doesn't change. So I just thought that
reps in.
Yeah. That mental maturity and mental stamina was just super impressive.
Yep.
So do you have somewhere you want to go next, Evan, or I can back us up for a second here?
Go for it. Cause the thing I was going to say is different. So,
okay. So, to take a left turn back to where we started here a little bit, something I didn't get a chance to ask about. We mentioned like the guts on snare drums being like 14 snare drums. Evan and I were speculating, you all have to take guts off the bottom drums, right? Or do you do just the full factory rack?
Crank them.
So most HBCU groups are gonna run all the guts.
Man.
And then some groups, depending on the region, might even run guts underneath the top head as well.
What? That's a new one on
all
me.
Right.
Yeah, it's that part right there is kind of a cultural thing. That's not all HBCUs. That's not even most HBCUs. That's a couple of groups are looking for a super snare sound. For me, that's not my preference. I guess probably the way I write, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's gonna be a lot of fast notes, a lot of fast stuff in there. Like it's just 16 guts multiplied by 14 players. It's just no. So I did hear y'all talking in one of the videos about like how did they achieve that snare sound. Yeah, you had it right. Yeah, we were taping those guts.
Okay. Makes sense. Because some of the stuff sounded too crisp, and I'm like, if there's 14 with untaped and they're not doing anything to kind of restrict that, there's no way it's going to sound that crisp with how many notes they're playing.
Because what Dynasties run 12, I think.
Dynasties run 16.
16, Pearls are 16.
Yamaha's 12.
10, maybe.
Yamaha's 10 or 12, something like that.
Yeah, 16's a lot.
That's a lot of guts.
It's a lot of guts. We ran 3 pieces of tape across those guts.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Go ahead, Evan.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
No, I was just gonna one other thing. Back to drumline size, or still on drumline size as a topic. Obviously, the bass drum culture in drum corps and WGI has become very focused on all these crazy splits and just running notes up and down the drums and all over the place and using unisons more, I guess, thematically or as an anchor point throughout phrases and to then support what the snares and quads are doing. With 10, 12 bass drums sometimes, like how much have splits become part of the game, like the norm in your all's world?
Yeah, so to answer this question, I'll say this. I had a professor in undergrad. He said something that's kind of stuck with me for a long time. He said, when you're outside of a genre, he was talking about different genres of music. When you're outside of a genre, everything sounds the same. When you're inside of a genre, everything sounds similar, right? So I know lots of people who would say, oh yeah, like all the drum corps groups sound exactly the same, right? And there might be people who even say, oh, the HBCU bands or the HBCU drum lines, I mean, they don't really do, it's all the same too, right? What I'm trying to describe is that there's a landscape here that is, it's vast. I'd actually say there's probably, DCI drumlines probably have more in common
with each other
than HBCU lines do.
Yeah.
Right. Depending how far south you go, how far west you go, like you're going to get some huge regional differences. So like up and down the East Coast from, say, maybe like Maryland all the way to Florida, those groups play very different further west you get. So once you start heading towards Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, that area, those groups, they play a completely different style. And then within that style, there's sub styles as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're on the East Coast, right, you have more of a more in the vein of what you saw with Norfolk and with A&T. You're going to see tonal bass drums. Some of those schools might have Scotch bass drums as well. Hampton University, where I'm at now, has Scotch basses. Bethune-Cookman, Florida A&M, North Carolina A&T, they have drums just there for deep resonance, right? Whereas if you go over to the Southwest, heading more towards Texas, you're going to get no tonal bass drums in some of those schools, and a lot of those schools, no tonal bass drums at all. It looks more, the playing style is more like the old guard than it is, contemporary drumline DCI style drumming.
Okay, so really you're gonna see different levels of splits in the bass lines depending on where you look. Some groups have more of it, some groups have less of it. And you mentioned more like, and I said this to you before we started recording, in snare land even, I mean, Norfolk video we watched and even Cold Steel had all kinds of passages in there that's like a drum corps could have played that. Like that could have been something written for a drum corps show. All the notiness and hybrid rudiments all over the place. And so it's interesting that it's depending on the region, you're going to get different levels of like, I don't want to say notes because that sounds derogatory, but different levels of different approaches essentially and what they focus on and how they try to
different levels of like instrument choice, stylistic writing and arranging. With DCI and WGI, like choreography has been just like such a huge insert into the activity now. But like there's like choreography and like what you all do, but it does definitely seem more just of a vibe. Like there's different times where they're like straight out dancing and like the motion is very extreme, and there's other time where it's just like like a subtle sway back and forth, like we're just vibing with the music. Is that something that's kind of always been part of the culture or something that has developed more recently?
Yeah, that's what you're describing is I'd say probably more an East Coast thing. The same way we would look at one of the groups that has 28-inch bass drums, if they came in up here and to the Virginia area and played a football game against us or another Virginia HBCU group, the way we'd have our faces kind of twisted up like, what is going on over there? They would look that way at us when we started dancing. They'd be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, this is drumline. Why are you dancing? So the cultural differences exist there too. The same way, like, probably most HBCU groups look at, a jazz run or something, and like
Yeah.
WGI or the spandex, and they're like, yeah, I'm not interested at all in
I'm
that.
not doing that.
Yeah, like, I'm hoping that, like, with the internet and us being, more connected now more than ever, like, I'm hoping that, like, we can have a little more crossover, right? Because there are really rich drum communities and cultures outside of DCI and WGI,
Hmm.
of kids who are, no one is speaking no one's speaking to their culture. Um, it's just going to be only a select group of kids that are going to be willing to run around like that, and it's not because they're not interested in marching that way. It's just because, I'd say there's not an appeal to, we got to learn how to speak their language, to really tap in.
I would actually argue, I don't know. Well, it doesn't have to be an argument, but I would feel pretty comfortable saying that, the videos of what we have sampled with Cold Steel and Norfolk are more accessible and entertaining to a mainstream audience than what DCI and WGI are.
Way more
Um,
digestible for the less informed viewer.
I
And
think
that's
you can
not to
turn.
downplay what you're doing. It's just easy to read.
I think you turn that on and you watch it, and it's visually appealing because
Mhm.
it's very together, and it's also like audibly appealing because like it has groove and funk to it. Versus like WGI and DCI, there's a pretty steep barrier to understand it on a high level. Like there's way not that this isn't a slight at like the HBCU style at all, but there is definitely like a nuance to what WGI and DCI do to like truly appreciate it. It takes like years because, like you said, you turn it on and like
They're all
Mike's
sounding the
brother is
same.
actually Mike's brother is actually a great witness to this. Like you
Yep.
turn it on and like this all sounds the same, and what are they wearing?
And what are they doing? And this is stupid.
Versus
Like,
versus like what Cold Steel and Norfolk, you see it, it's like a very traditional uniform that I think most people be like, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is what I've seen at like the high school football games or the college football games that I've turned on for decades, and it sounds fun. And OSU's marching band is out there making stick figures, kicking football fields. That's entertaining. Like that type of stuff, I would say, is more accessible and engaging to a mainstream audience than like drum corps.
and not only that, but I think the uninformed viewer can tell they're performing at a high level. It's easy to tell that. Like, I've had people watch the gamut of WGI and DCI groups, some good, some bad, and they can't tell you really most of the time. It's like 12th place versus first place. It's hard to tell to the uninformed viewer. Whereas I feel like the way that it's presented, written, performed really well, you can tell when it's really good, even if you don't know exactly technically what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people who have, especially in the HBCU world, that have prioritized like how the music feels being
Mm,
like, the priority,
right.
right? And that's not to say that doesn't happen, in DCI or WGI. I mean, I have, shows favorited. I have screen clips of like my favorite moments of indoor groups playing, or, um, I was there when Blue Coats did Tilt, man. Like, I,
Yeah.
I was in Atlanta. I was in the audience. I saw how the people reacted. People were crying, like screaming and crying. And I remember thinking, uh, how free they appear to be, to emote and be that expressive,
Hmm.
But also, like, man, what an effect! Like, what a moment
Yeah.
that was. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, is the effect. Not,
Exactly.
I won't say it's necessarily been lost, but I'll say, like, there is,
It's less
man,
overt a lot of times.
yeah, and like you said, it's more nuanced. And I
Hmm.
think that at the end of the day, it has to feel good, particularly um to the performing members. So it's like,
Yep.
on in the HBCU world, it's like, man, yeah, all the playing is cool, but it doesn't make me feel good,
Yeah.
And so that's still a priority in a lot of groups, making sure that it feels good.
And like you said, you touched on like groups are still very rooted on tradition, which I think is fantastic.
It's awesome.
And DCI and WGI are definitely more of a like change with the times, like
Hmm.
what's the it thing. So it's definitely a different, just kind of apples to oranges
Yep.
comparison of this drumming activity. And like obviously too with DCI and WGI, the front ensemble is very heavily prevalent. I don't know if the HBCU style, like if they still try to incorporate a lot of front ensemble stuff in what they do, or do some groups do it and some groups don't? Is that a commonality?
Yeah, so it's not super common to see a front ensemble. That's not to say it never happens or it can't happen. It's just I think all these groups kind of evolved from the same place, right? The military. So a lot of things changed over time. So I saw a clip on one of like some like drum corps, like vintage drum corps Instagram page or something of like guys marching tenor drums, right? Well, that eventually ended up fading away, and you got to, there was the temp toms era. People were strapping up timpani. I mean, good
You had people
lord,
putting on
like,
bell kits marching around the field for a while there.
yeah, I saw the bell kits, right? But then I have a picture of someone marching a set of chimes in my
Chimes,
phone.
yeah, they have like
I've
3 or something.
I've seen pictures of
Yeah,
that too. It's insane.
it's insane. And then back in like the 80s, or maybe even before that, these guys were marching like 36, 38-inch bass drums. It's like that guy's back is trash right now. Yeah, it's like
done.
he has no cartilage like at all. But as things were changing, as groups were trying to get a leg up in the drum corps world, like the wanting to stick to tradition in the HBCU world still had things changing, but a lot of stuff was not changing. So HBCUs will still wear, as many like high school bands do, a military style uniform. Like that, the spandex thing is just not going to happen,
which
right?
I personally prefer the traditional military style uniform. I miss drum corps coming out in a block from the tunnel and Lucas Oil, and like everything
You
is
got the
uniform.
hat on, you can't even see your eyes.
Shakos are pulled real low. Like I loved that. That was one of my favorite parts about performing in those groups, was how you felt in that uniform. And then you watch the videos later, it just looks badass, for lack of a better way to put it.
It's definitely a difference of like, kind of like that machine militaristic versus like what you were describing with Tilt, where like the emotion is like, they're trying to portray an emotion with shows, which...
And nothing's better one way or the other. I don't want to say one's better or not. It's just different. It's just a different vibe, different approach. We say on here all the time, there's a million ways to skin the cat in our world. In the drumming world, there's different ways to write, different ways to perform, different density levels of notes you prefer, don't prefer. Like, it's just all what you need for the music at the end of the day in your approach.
And after watching...
I mean, I was going to say there's videos online of like groups, with no props on the field, right? We're entering from the end zone or the backfield or whatever. And it's very traditional. And they're even playing like popular music or even like jazz tunes. I mean, there's, what group is it? I don't want to get the name wrong. But they're playing like Earth, Wind, and Fire and stuff. You know what I mean? And it's like, and I understand how it happens. It happens because the way adjudication is happening has changed over time, and everyone's trying to get the competitive edge. Oh, visual is a thing. How can we increase our visual score? All right, well, you're telling me that props and uniforms can potentially increase effect or visual or this or that or whatever. That's how it happens.
Yep. And the groups, and considering for DCI, WGI, the groups are the ones that create the sheets, so they create what they want.
Yep.
I do think though that we're getting, after watching these videos recently, like some crossover of like groove, especially like when you watch a lot of these drum corps now that they're doing with like their exercise routine or their exercise packet and their training, like things have more vibe. Like you watch Blue Coats and Roger Carter, and they got the drum set out there and they're establishing that identity with that. And like groups are now like marking time less in the lot, and they're just kind of like pumping the knee and vibing and stuff. And that was a lot of the vibe that I got watching, Norfolk, Cold Steel, just like, they're warming up, but the warm-ups have a vibe. Like there's a groove in there, even just playing. I mean, it's in there, and they're just like, all right, this has a purpose to train us, but also we're not just going to do something that's like super stale.
Yeah, we can have fun with it at the same time and actually make music with the exercises still.
And I've heard people argue different things about that. Like, no, these 4 warm-ups that I have, they work and they've worked for the last 20 years. So why do I ever need to change it? Versus like, okay, we're in the lot, let's put on a performance, So, and you've seen over time, like how when a certain drum line will enter the lot, everyone runs from this battery over there because everyone wants to see what they're going to do. So yeah, I mean, my personal opinion on that is, man, if we're gonna play this every day, and I want you to march for, you're gonna march for 4 years, and I want you to play this every day. I want you to enjoy playing it, and I want
Right.
it to sound good. So I want it to sound good, and I want it to feel good in the hands too. So, you know, that's the easiest way to, get better is by playing stuff you want to play,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's tough. So that's my philosophy is I like to make it look and sound good.
Yep, I think there's definitely a middle ground. Our opinion on here about that whole thing about like what should your warm-ups be? I think if they're too simple, it's not good. If they're too complicated, it's also not good. Like there's got to be some kind of middle ground where it's fun to play, gets the job done. It's not wasting, like taking your attention and time away from your competitive music, but it's still entertaining, fun, warms you up, then you can move on to the next thing.
Even Colin
Right,
McNutt, when he was on here, he said, like, I changed my philosophy on that. Like I started to implement like basic strokes and like maybe put a tag on the end of this exercise, something that has some flair to it, like for the kids and for the membership, because they like playing it. And it's also like it attracts people, like you said, like, oh, Boston's warming up, I gotta go catch this. I want to hear it. So, or here's Bethune-Cookman warming up, I want to go catch what they're doing. Like, so I think that stuff is good for the mental health and like enjoyment of the members, like you said. I think you nailed it.
Yep.
It adds a kind of another layer too to like the experience, right? These kids are getting off the bus now, and like basic strokes is an old warm up, right? Like that's not new. So kids who grow up wanting to learn how to drum, you've probably heard basic strokes 1,000 times if you have a YouTube account. So to become a member and then actually get to play it, I mean, the amount of pride you probably have in the lot, like playing that through, is probably, that it's a driving factor about kind of the people who want to be members of that core.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's cool too. Like you talked about the HBCU style and like, wanting to stick with tradition and like uphold that for their alumni, because as like a first or like a current generation, like you are in the ensemble that you're in because they did something that you liked and something attracted you to that. So it's cool to like still do that because you loved it, but also maybe like, hey, we'll tweak it just a slight edge to like our alumni be like, hey, they're still doing that while we do it, but there was like a slight twist or flair on it just to keep it a little fresh, because I do think that keep it fresh.
That's a great observation, and that's something that actually does happen in time, because like, okay, if I grew up 15 minutes away from this college, I've been going to the football games since I was a little kid, listening to this drumline play, and then I end up attending that university. I learn it. Oh my God, I'm here. I'm actually learning the material. I march it for a couple of years, and then we change one little tiny thing in there, a little, just the way we step off here, or the way how this stick height looks, or we look at the stick here when we didn't do it before. Man, that difference, that's like 1,000 times more important to that group and that alumni base, because they're like, oh, did you see what they did there? That was a fresh new look on something, and the general audience will have no clue that anything changed at all, because it's so subtle.
Like they paid homage to us, but like they made it their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mean, I love when groups have an identity like that. I mean, yeah,
that's one of the things. Speaking of identity of groups, we're talking about like the traditional military uniforms versus what drum corps and WGI are doing now. And indoor always had their own like uniforms or costumes tailored to the show, but drum corps with that more traditional approach to the uniform, like it's just, we feel like, or I feel like for sure, I don't put words in Evan's mouth, a lot of corps have almost lost identity because there's no continuity with the uniform. Like some groups, like the Blue Devils in drum corps, will have still flares of their traditional uniform image in their yearly costume or uniform change, but so many, it's like if you close your eyes and they don't announce it, like you're probably not going to know what corps just came on the field. And that makes me a little sad. But
I saw, for instance, Bethune-Cookman, I believe they just got new uniforms recently, and I believe it is the exact same uniform as the one they've been wearing for like the last 30 years. There may have been like a small change of something that if you weren't an insider or marched in that uniform, you're not going to know the difference. Yeah, but it's a branding exercise, right? It's like, why would they want to change it if kids have been looking at this uniform and going, I want to wear that? I don't want to wear this newfangled thing. I want to wear the thing that I've been watching for the last 15 years.
Hopefully, maybe a slightly more breathable material, but the same.
True. Lighter material, lighter weight.
Are like the Hampton uniforms and stuff? Are they still like pretty like heavy?
And so Hampton's uniforms, they've actually kind of got it made. They have and I've only seen this with a couple other groups, but it's pretty hot down here in Virginia, man. Especially like when we're outside July. Well, not July, but maybe August. Well, yeah, school starts in August. So yeah, July, August, September, October, November is football season. So it's like it's pretty hot, and the humidity is a killer. I think you guys are like not far from us, so I don't have to explain it to you about the humidity.
Oh, yeah. Kentucky gets humid.
Yeah, it's bad. So Hampton's uniforms, they just got new uniforms a couple of years ago, but they actually have sleeves that zip off of the uniform or clip off of the uniform. So they can take the sleeves off and it becomes like a short sleeve uniform.
That's pretty cool.
Dude, that reminds me of like some old breakaway pants I used to wear playing AAU basketball or something.
Like the tearaways?
Yeah.
Oh,
Stephon Marbury came out with he had like two buttons buttoned up.
Yeah. It's underrated how much sleeves can be a problem though, just for drummers.
Yeah.
As an instructor, it's like every year I have to get out there and ensure that like the sleeves aren't gonna like cause a catastrophic situation like while the young person is performing.
Yep.
So the ability to take them off is nice.
For sure.
I just looked it up. Hampton is like basically latitude wise like equal with where I'm at. Like shoot. So yeah.
So hot, yeah.
It's hot.
Humid, hot.
Well, we kind of talked about this beforehand, but I do think that at some point we should do like a revisit of like just walking through some videos, whether it's like some stuff that you have kind of on your back end. They're like, hey, I got some stuff that I'd love to show you. Just talk more in depth about like to give examples of this stuff. Because, I do have a newfound research. I don't want to say resurface. It's definitely newly found like appreciation for just, what's going on outside of my like,
bubble.
Blinder bubble zone of drumming. In anything that we can do to help, just pay it forward to the next generation of drumming, whether it's HBCU style, whether it's, college band on the West Coast, whether it's drum corps, WGI, like I'm all for it.
Yeah, definitely. And I know because drum corps is so big, a lot of the guys who really get serious about percussion, especially if they're educators, like regardless if it's HBCU group, if you don't really make it past high school, but you have a music degree, like you kind of have to be tapped in as to like what the trends are, like what's happening, within the marching culture in general. So a lot of us guys, we go to the shows. Like we're at Night Beat, almost every year, because I think that's the closest one to us. So we drive out there, do a night there, and then head back the next day.
There's always a good lineup at Night Beat.
Yep, and I know the schedule came out like a couple weeks ago. I haven't seen who's coming, but hopefully all the heavy hitters will be there.
I think so.
Usually a lot of them are.
Typically like a top 8 show now or something, like a whatever they call it, tour champions.
Yep, one of those things. But
but I'm definitely happy to talk more about any of the HBCU stuff and kind of translate or be a gateway into the culture for whoever's interested in learning. Definitely.
Yeah, man.
We're definitely down. We'll make it happen.
I think some of the East Coast stuff is kind of like the closest go-between, for making sense of like, I know East Coast and like the drum corps world means something different, but like East Coast out here is like, like from Virginia down to Florida, basically. Those groups probably have more in common with the stuff you guys are used to watching.
A good like stepping stone of like bridging from like what we know versus maybe something that's like you were talking about as you go further west with those groups in Louisiana, Mississippi, just bridging that gap into like stuff that's like, oh, like this is definitely more like you said, old guard, like
traditional and all that kind of stuff.
Which thankfully that stuff is getting more like mainstream too. So
yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a fan of drums, so I'll watch all of it.
Clean is clean, man.
It's good. It's good.
We're all just out here pursuing clarity at the end of the day. So, what Well,
yeah.
We got anything else we want to hit? Or this went way longer than I thought. This was awesome. We hit all kinds of cool stuff, learned a lot. Thank you for coming on, obviously. We're definitely down to do it again.
Yeah, happy to help out, and I'm happy to come back if you guys want to chat some more.
For sure, man.
Perfect.
Down.
All right. Well, let's close this out. Comment, like, subscribe, share the video, everybody. Facebook, Instagram, follow, aged.podcast.com, grab a shirt or sticker. Patreon, join button here on YouTube. Aged Out Fundamentals, drum every day. It will help you. You will thank yourself later. But other than that, was that, Evan?
Get them chops up.
Oh, yeah. Other than that, we'll see everybody in the next one.
Peace.